as Cindy said, I'm Oscar. I've worked for UC Cooperative Extension in Fresno County this past service year. I've been doing a lot of different stuff with them, mostly focusing on their soil health and regenerative ag projects and practices and stuff like that. Yeah, before I start, I just wanted to do a land acknowledgement. Um, Fresno County sits on top of the land of the Yokut and the Mono tribes. And because we're part of UC A&R, which is part of UC Davis, we're also part of the Patwin tribes. And my supervisor, Jesse Cantor, co-wrote a land acknowledgement for one of our different conferences we had in Davis. And I think it's really fitting for a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to read it to you all. Before we all start our activities, we'd like to take a moment to both acknowledge the ancestral indigenous lands of the Patwin tribes and provide reflection points for how stolen indigenous land has contributed to the success and profit of the University of California system. The lands we stand on are home of the indigenous people of the Patwin tribe, who have inhabited the beautiful and diverse ecosystems that comprise what is now commonly referred to as the Sacramento Valley. The stewardship of oak forests, chaparrals, foothills, canyons, creeks, and springs and valley plains have been led by the Patwin tribes throughout time. And today they continue their stewardship in efforts to protect and restore waterways and native ecosystems that have been harmed by over-extraction and industrial activities since the colonization of California. Through theft, sale, and donations of 5,300 acres of ancestral indigenous lands has become the University of California, Davis. It should be acknowledged that indigenous people across California did not receive a single cent for the land stolen and sold to fund the University of California's endowment or for land sold to benefit other institutions across the US. And this is only a fraction of the approximately 150,000 acres owned by the UC across the state. As of June 2022, the UC Office of the President estimates that its endowments and assets are worth approximately $28 billion. We outline this context in hopes that the UC will not only acknowledge the ancestral land stolen from indigenous people across California, but work to identify paths forward that give agency and rights to this land back to indigenous peoples in an effort to seek the justice for the harm that underlies the UC's assets and endowments. So our team at the UC Cooperative Extension Fresno is a really big and diverse group. We have a lot of different people that do a lot of different stuff, mainly doing with healthy soils, pest management, water testing, technical assistance, education, outreach, translations, and food safety. There's so many different parts that make up our team that I couldn't focus on all of them during my time here, but we all served Fresno County and Madera County in different ways. And it showed by all the stuff all the projects and all the outreach and outwork and things we did for everybody. We ended up having, I think, over 15 or 20 different workshops this year when I was part of the team. And a lot of the GrizzlyCorps fellows were able to come for that. So it was a really great thing. We have a lot of stuff that goes on with our team. Some of the projects that I worked on and other things like that were our cover crops, compost, and mulch. That was basically what I focused on, was the soil side of our team. There are other projects. A bigger one right now is a Mexican rice borer pest management. We have other coworkers that did a lot of grant assistance and a lot of technical assistance, especially when it came to do with sweep and now going into the land of what's going to be now regulated by SGMA. I did end up planting a lot of hedgerows and planting a lot of different hedgerows for different farmers. And like a lot of people that do a lot of field work, there are always lots and lots of animals. And that is my supervisor's cat that watched us while we were building boxes to put owl boxes up on people's farms. So the one project I wanted to talk to you all about today was our cover crop project, because that's the one that spanned throughout most of my service year. For those that don't know, cover crops are meant to be crops that you plant into your fields that aren't used as that aren't meant to be harvested, but rather to bring some type of benefit back into your field. You can use it to cover your soil, keep roots in the ground to bring nutrients back into the soil or to allow more water to come in. If Many of you might be aware of the Central Valley and its fields, but if any of you have driven up and down the 5 or the 99, have seen, those fallow, just plain dirt fields that have nothing growing on them and there's dust blowing everywhere. A lot of soil and land is lost that way through just like wind blowing away soil. So the one way that we help combat different things is by planting cover crops. By using cover crops on your off seasons and times when you're not really planting anything, you allow your soil to be covered and not be swept away by wind. It's also depending on what type of crops you use, adds more nutrients and other things back to your soil depending on what you want. A lot of them, the cover crops we used, were meant to uptake nitrogen and to make sure that there wasn't any nitrogen leaking back into groundwater. So that was one of our biggest projects with them. So the cycle of cover crops is basically, for our purposes, because these were meant to be used on fallow fields that weren't being planted with, we would plant them in mid to late fall. You can see there at the bottom left is a picture of a field that didn't have anything on it that would eventually be covered with cover crops. And then once you plant them and you seed them, they would start to grow during the rain season. And we wanted to do that because we didn't want to use any irrigation water for that. And that allowed, less money to have to be spent and less water to be used to grow these cover crops. And then eventually, once they start growing and biggering, they start flowering, and then they attract pollinators and beneficial insects. And then eventually, before the farmer would be growing their crops for the season, they would terminate them or incorporate them into their fields however they see fit. And that would usually happen, usually mid to late spring, sometimes in the summer, depending on what cover crops you are planting. So for planting, there are a lot of different ways to do it. In this little crude picture I put here, you can see a little broadcast seeder, which is basically like what you use for turf. And we used those to broadcast seed some of the fields that we were using because we had 3 specific fields that we chose that we were going to do groundwater recharge tests on. So for those, we didn't use the seeder, which is right next to it, which attaches to your tractor, and you would pull it across the field and it would drop the seeds and cover it with them. But yeah, it took a long time, and then we rototilled it in. It was a lot of work, but we got it done, and they grew and they got really, really big. Yeah, we use 50-pound bags. You can see this bag up here in the corner. That one is, I want to say that one was our oats and radish bags. They were about 50-pound bags, and we used about 100 pounds per acre. So they grew pretty big. So during growth, once you plant and everything like that, the rain comes down, makes them germinate, and they start growing. And like I said earlier, we only use the rain, so farmers and growers wouldn't have to use their own irrigation systems to make these plants and crops grow. You can see here in the photo, there's a quadrat on the ground because we're taking biomass sampling for these 3 fields that we were doing our projects on. We were trying to figure out how much was grown in a given, square foot of the field. So we would throw this out there wherever it would land. We would cut all the biomass that was up there, take it out, and then take a picture of whatever amount of weeds we would see left. But as you can see in the photo, there's not a lot of weeds. Most of that is just like little pieces of cover crop residue because the cover crops are really, really good at creating pressure on weeds. So a lot of them didn't actually grow for most of them. So the flowering part, yeah. So once they grew up huge and big, they would all start flowering and start showing, and it would attract a bunch of pollinators and beneficial insects, and it would be really nice and really pretty when you would walk around and would hear it. You would hear the buzzing of the bees, the butterflies. You'd see the insects crawling. You'd see just a bunch of different types of some small little animals, other things like that. But yeah, the pollinators were a really big um, benefit to the cover crops because a lot of our farmers have perennial crops that need pollinators and they don't have any type of habitat to stay in, and at least the cover crops would give them a temporary habitat to stay there for. Of course, cover cropping isn't just a one size fits all thing. So this would be usually we would hope that it would be added with using hedgerows, which would leave a permanent habitat for pollinators to be there, and this would just increase their habitat for the time being and allow them to go out and pollinate other perennial crops that they had. So yeah, a lot of the soil because of the cover crops was being undisturbed, less than they already were, which means that they were allowed to get more structure. And a lot of the cover crops we use, such as the radish, the oats, and other things like that, had very big roots that allowed a lot of infiltration into the soil, which means that water and other nutrients were able to get deeper into the soil and break it up. So you don't have super compacted soil like you would if you were just disking and tilling fields with giant tractors all day. That really compacts the soil. So by doing that, it does help with compaction and infiltration. And as you can see here, the little chart, it says 100% of Jesse's love showing soil from cover crop fields. That was probably one of the funnest days we had out there at this demo farm for the African American farmers of California, where we showed a lot of different farmers how the soil looks compared to cover crop fields and to hedgerows and to disked and fallowed soils. And you could definitely see the difference between all of them. You could see the fallow field having just pretty much just sand and just very soft soil with no nutrients. The cover crop field having a little bit more structure. Of course, it being only like year two of the cover crop project, it wasn't super strong and super like dense structured soil. And then when we went to the hedgerows, you could see that it was very structured, had a lot of different types of insects in it. We found a lot of worms, a lot of little beetles and stuff like that all in them. So they were very, you can see the difference and the different benefits that it brings to the soil when you apply these practices in different ways. So yeah, once they're grown and they're all out there, it's probably a good idea to terminate because at some point those flowers will start seeding and it could become a problem or it couldn't, just depending on what it is you want to do with your fields. So a lot of farmers, they can choose to mow, as you can see in the bottom picture, that is Jose on our tractor mowing down a cover crop field. You can also crimp it on the top with the tractor with the crimp attachment to it. It basically snaps them from the above ground growth and folds them down, and it allows you to kind of keep a mulch layer made from these cover crops, and then you can plant in between them, as you can see in the photo next to it. You can also disc this in, rototill it in, and then what we did for one of our fields was we added compost to one of the terminated cover crops field and then tilled it in together and then added a layer of plastic. You can see in that photo. This is called biosolarization. And what this does is another practice used to bring in, to superheat the soil in order to cook and kill any type of seed banks you may have from any of your wheat seeds that you have. And doing this and adding water to it basically acts like a super greenhouse. And when you do this in the summer, when the the temperatures reach anywhere from 100 to 115, it superheats the top layer of the soil and starts to kill off all those weed seeds that you may have in your soil. The other thing we did with our cover crops was we were trying to find out how to how well the cover crops help with groundwater recharge. So we used canal water coming from the irrigation districts, and we flooded our fields that had cover crops in them, and they had lysimeters in there that showed how much water was coming in, and we also tested that water for nitrates because we wanted to see how well it would infiltrate and how much nitrates were being taken up from these cover crops and were taken out of the soil and wouldn't be leaching into the water. So yeah, that was other things that we did, and Cover crops have so many different types of benefits and uses that they don't only have to have, one thing. They can be used in different ways. There's also you can use cover crops as a smaller um, living mulch. You can plant them in between your rows. That way you have growth going in between your rows. That'll help with weed pressure and also have them living while your cash crops are growing. And yeah, we would use a lot of the termination when we incorporated it into the soil. We also added compost to a lot of them. And it also brings back even more nutrients with the compost. And while that residue breaks down, it also brings even more nutrients back into the soil. So yeah, it was a very long process. I think it took us until the first month of the summer. We started in October to November, I want to say, when we started our cover crops, and we finally ended like the entire project in I want to say June, part of June. So it was getting a little hot, but it was still okay. Yeah, I wanted to say thank you to everybody that helped me out with this. My supervisor, Jesse Cantor, my coworker, Jose, Sarah, Lillian, and everybody that was working with me in there, and to all my GrizzlyCorps fellows that helped me out with, just being part of a community was really great. And being around like-minded people and everybody that came out to Fresno that also joined in on our workshops or projects or any of the teachings and stuff like that we had. It really made our or my service here really memorable, and I really enjoyed, my time at the UC Cooperative Extension, and I hope to find more teams like this in my life because it was a really special time I had there for those 11 months. But yeah, thank you.